Like to render comment, please step forward and you shall be heard. There being no citizens seeking to render comment, we've satisfied this element of the agenda. Next item on the agenda is approval of March 17 minutes. Do I hear a motion to approve?
I so move.
Do I hear a second?
I second.
Any discussion? In favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? Motion carries. The minutes are approved. Next item on the agenda is comprehensive plan update, review of draft land use, economic development, natural environment, and capital facilities elements. I invite to the presentation table the Director of Community Development and Kenmore Senior Planner.
This is an exciting meeting. Hopefully that this is the last piece of the comp plan. If we get through tonight, then we'll be ready for the public hearing. And I think we kind of alerted to you that there's a lot of information to go through, but you've been very efficient in your review and comments over the last several weeks. I am very confident that you'll get through this evening. So, Laurie, do you want to start with the first one?
So there are four elements or chapters before you this evening. All of them, as with the set you reviewed at your last meeting, are supposed to be in the vein of minor edits, but bringing the background information up to date as much as possible. And then if there is an issue that would make the element more current and seems to fit within existing policy direction, then we did add a few or tweak a few goals, objectives, or policies. So if it works for you, I thought I might just go element by element and explain what I felt the highlights were for each one, and then we can address your questions and comments. Is that all right?
It.
Okay.
Well, wait a minute. Do we have the option of going by exception?
I think, yeah, if you want to go by exception, if you want a little overview first and then do it by exception, that's fine. If you want to just go straight to exception, it's your prerogative.
No, let's do some overview if it's reasonably brief. Then.
Yeah, it's very brief.
Okay.
Okay. So the land use element is the first element in front of you this evening. And as you recall, some of you were here during the regional business zoning project. We really took a look at the commercial zoning and adjusted that. So a good portion of a land use element review occurred last year. But in this version, I wanted to make just a few notes. One thing that has changed is that we've fallen in line with the Vision 2040 and King County countywide planning policies designation of Kenmore as a larger city. In the element, there was some discussion about an urban center. Kenmore has not been an urban center, and I know at least one council member had said this is an important point of clarification. So we are targeted to be a larger city, which is a future growth area, hopefully dependent on transit, but that's one change that you would see in the element. The historical information has been updated. A survey was done a few years ago just to identify properties that might be eligible for landmark designation. And so I've expanded a little bit in that section with that information. We've added airport information. This was an important component. I think we talked a little bit about this. So we actually met with Todd Banks, and we met with a PSRC representative and added in some factual information. Actually, Todd, I met with John Gowie, who is the Kenmore Air Operations Manager, and he provided information. I got an email from Todd Banks this morning, and he had a few clarifications. About the number of airplanes that are there. The number that they operate was correct, but they have some private airplanes based there. And then he also clarified that at this time they don't do float manufacturing there at the site. So I would plan to make those edits to the airport planning information. The existing land use, we have a new intern who started 2 weeks ago who's very good at GIS and is taking the King County Assessor data, and then we're sort of fact-checking some of the properties, but I hope she'll be done this week so that we'll be able to insert that information into the document before it goes out for the public hearing. Anyway, that's being done. And then I also, in the element, mentioned the town green and the community building. It was kind of fun to look back and see how far the city has come from those early discussions about where the city hall should go and the library, and to see that all coming to fruition. I also put in a paragraph about Lake Point. The city, as you know, the P suffixes and the Lake Point project are not something that we're taking up. That was a decision made last year. The Planning Commission and the City Council concurred with that. But there are some holdover comprehensive plan policies from the North Shore Plan. That's the King County Plan. And we would prefer to repeal all of those, but there is one that is specifically related to the Lake Point property and is kind of a foundation policy. So that policy we did want to reference in the land use element. And then the last thing is that there are no more joint study areas. You probably saw that. All that language was taken out because Kirkland and Bothell have annexed those respective areas.
Okay, so that's land use? Mm-hmm. Any exceptions?
I mean, is this where we comment?
Mm-hmm.
On yeah.
Go ahead.
I just said a couple little things.
And I think, is your mic on?
Maybe not.
Yeah,
Now it is.
Great, thanks.
And this was a lot to look at. So I hope I can get to the right parts. But LU 332, were we?
Page?
That's what I'm talking
Bottom
about.
right.
4A-29.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll take your word for it. Are we referencing, oh God, where is it? 332.
It's all about the community history, Deborah?
Yeah,
Is that what
the issue, I was just wondering whether we were referencing something other than the history rock, because we're talking about like a museum, and I didn't know whether, I mean, it seems like we kind of, that's one of those things that feels like we kind of accomplished unless we're thinking about something else.
So the policy work in partnership with the Kenmore Heritage Society, other agencies and special districts to identify places or facilities where a museum or display of historic artifacts and information can be accomplished.
Right, do we still think that's current, or was that accomplished? That's what I was just...
I don't know about the history and what may have been accomplished. I guess it was retained just because I think it was focusing more on the display of historic artifacts,
Okay.
thinking to the future if there were
that's
some.
And then the only other question was okay. So the only other one was there were sort of chunks about the Sammamish River and Swamp Creek. I said 4D89. Is that in some other component?
Right, that's in the natural environment
That's in
element,
natural,
I think.
okay.
Yeah.
And then my notes are not clear. Okay, so that's natural environment or something?
Right, and
Okay.
we'll go to that one shortly.
Okay. And the emergency management one, that's separate also, right? You had a new...
Right, that was
Yeah,
a new
okay,
one. Mhm.
right.
Correct.
Okay, anybody else? Anyone else? Okay, Mark.
4A-13 is the page number. Future land use. The second bullet point, it talks about concentration of commercial and business uses, locations targeted for conversion, and it primarily occur in the form of redevelopment in downtown. And I guess I was just wondering, what's the definition of downtown? Do we have a actual, because I know, we've talked about the conversions, happening sort of throughout the RB, and I know there's sort of a downtown, but what's the...
Right. So the downtown is a big area. It's defined in the downtown sub-element, and it includes the area from about, on the north side of 522, from about 73rd to the end of the Kenmore Village property here. And then on the south side of 522, it goes down and incorporates the Plywood Supply property and the Lake Point property. So in general terms, it's a very broad area. We sometimes talk about the downtown core or the sort of the civic center at the northwest quadrant of 68th and 181st.
So I guess in terms of this plan there, then we can just keep the word in downtown. That's sufficient for.
Right. It's that broader area. You would read that as the broader area.
So it would be referenced there. Okay.
Right.
So in the next bullet, there was a mention of market and regulatory forces kind of phasing out the manufacturing and industrial uses. What sort of regulatory forces are you
I think
kind of
that
referencing there?
This was added at the time of a city council discussion about the industrial users and just a variety of things that were going to be used to reinforce that what the community wanted was a cleaner approach. And I don't know, Debbie, if you can speak at all to that.
I think that's what the Planning Commission heard from the council at several joint meetings when we were going through the regional business zone project. I think the idea of phasing out heavy industrial use has been sort of an ongoing policy, and this is just sort of clarifying what would replace heavy industry in terms of a lighter, cleaner manufacturing.
Right, I remember that being one of the principles. So that's what it's referencing to, whatever we had talked about in terms of policy and.
Right.
An example of a regulatory force was the change that the Planning Commission made to the existing legal nonconforming rules. Do you remember that allowed existing heavy industrial to continue and even to expand? And the Planning Commission and the City Council decided that they were not comfortable with that approach. They went back to a straight nonconforming use for those properties. That's the kind of regulatory force that I think is being brought to bear here.
Okay. Let's see, I'm going to have to scroll down here just a second. On page 4A16, it talks about, it's just sort of a word thing, Goal 1, enhance Kenmore's quality of life as a place to live, raise children, recreate, work, shop, and socialize. The word shop I just kind of highlighted. I don't know if it includes, services that we're trying to, include there as well. But when I think of shopping, I just think of, kind of retail type goods.
I think that phrase actually is in the vision statement.
The word shop?
Yep. I think so. The current vision statement, the intro, talks about a high quality of life as a place to live, raise children, shop, work, recreate, and socialize. I adopted those words straight from the vision statement.
Okay. Just a couple more. If somebody else wants to go ahead while I'm finding this, go. Let's see, page 27. On page 4A24, you referenced at the bottom there, LU-2.3.1, an average density of at least 7 homes per acre in the city through a mix, and just wondered how you came up with that number.
I actually didn't. That's existing text.
That's existing, okay.
Right. So again, the new text is always highlighted in yellow.
Okay.
Underline is added text. Strike through is deleted text. So I left this in here because I didn't feel like there had been necessarily a policy change or direction. It seemed a significant issue to change that without a full discussion.
Right, okay.
So.
That's all.
Thank you, Mark. Anyone else? All right. Next item. I'm sorry. Did I see a hand?
Oh.
You saw a hand.
I saw him.
All right. What's the next item? Economic?
All right. So the economic development sub-element.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, did you have some, Mike?
I did.
Okay,
Okay.
chip in.
On page, excuse me if you already mentioned this, 4A11, there's a sentence that says the balance of the fleet travels directly from Kenmore to northern Canada. Was that intentional?
Yes. So that what we heard from Kenmore Air is that part of their fleet, before they go out wherever they're flying to, they travel first to their airport on their seaport on Lake Union and pick up passengers, and then they head out. And then the rest of the fleet flies directly, and those they don't go south first. They head north, and they go. Those planes typically are going to the far north, far northern Canada. An interesting fact.
Indeed. Anything else, Mike?
I did on page 4A21, second paragraph, second to last sentence. Regarding the type of economic activities that were not being encouraged, I guess these are my words, are not compatible. It mentions that use is not compatible, or the intent is to require vehicle or material storage, service bays, wide curb cuts, expanses, exterior product displays or storage for this little customer visitor are discouraged. And the reason I just made a note on that is that the strength of the language you were hoping to put in there, discouragement?
Yeah, again, this is pre-existing language. It's in the plan now, and this particular paragraph is directly related to the zoning, which prohibits all of these things. So certainly discourage, it can be that strong. The zoning prohibits most of these uses in the downtown, in this northern part of the downtown commercial.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, then the zoning would prohibit certain uses.
Correct.
In the area, but the master plan would discourage?
The way the policy language flows is that the plan sets out the policy intent, and then the zoning implements it. So this policy intent, which was put in place in 2003, probably around the same time that the downtown plan was done, says that these uses should be or are discouraged, and then the zoning is the regulatory mechanism, and it prohibits them, sort of following on from this. Often in a good example is should versus shall. In the comprehensive plan, it usually says this should happen, or this should happen, or this should happen. But when you get to the regulatory piece, the zoning code, then it says shall, and that actually means absolutely no question.
It's the law.
Right, exactly, because it is the legal
Prohibition.
regulatory.
So, at this level, one of the reasons we can move through this pretty quickly is this is policy, it's not legal recommendations. Last year we made legal recommendations in the zoning proposal to the council. So we really worked over the language carefully, and Lori brought multiple drafts back. But this is much broader, it's not binding, so the stakes are a lot lower.
Thanks for the clarification.
Anybody else? All right. Economic
Okay.
development.
Economic development. So this is a sub-element of the broader land use element, and there were 4 points I wanted to make about this one. First of all, as part of the regional business project that many of you participated in, we had Burke do an economic development study primarily for the regional business zone, but that is it contained information relevant sort of to the whole downtown. And so what I tried to do was to incorporate as much of that information as I could to update the background information. I also added a comment about SR 522 as an alternative commuter route. That certainly is a change that the whole community has seen with the tolling of 520. I put in mention of Bastyr and its relationship to the natural health cluster, which is something that the city has been pursuing through the Economic Development Council and with the university. And then in 2009, there was an economic development strategy that was created. It's a separate standalone document that has some real specific measures, many of which the city has taken. But I wanted to put more detail into the element about that strategy, acknowledge that it existed, and pull out some of the highlights from that.
All right, any comments or objections? Deborah?
You're going to give me a hard time. So there were 3 little places I was curious why they were cut, and 2 of them are on the first page. So I was curious why we would cut the word diversify the economy, because I think we do want to do more than just expand, because like we have a lot of banks and a lot of fast food, but we don't want just more of them. We want diversified economy. And then
where is that?
the bottom of the first F4F1.
Oh, the very second to last.
Yeah, the very bottom.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that's one. I don't know if that's.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a response to that.
Okay.
I think
I'd feel more comfortable if we could keep it in, because I think it is the spirit of what we'd like to see. You know, we'd like to see more and different, not just more. I don't know.
okay.
Any response from others? It does beg the question, why would we strike it? But I don't think you know.
I don't think I know.
All right.
I will tell
Of
you.
all the words to strike, that looks like it ought
I'm
to
sorry.
stay.
Okay, so we're good
Sounds
on
like
that?
we have agreement on that.
Okay.
Okay, so it's going to read strengthen, expand, and diversify.
There you
Is
go.
that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, strengthen, expand, and diversify.
Okay, and then
Okay.
on the next page, it looked like, and maybe this will be replaced, because I know you're replacing a lot of tables, but why were we cutting the jobs per capita comparison? Because that's kind of at least to me, that was a pretty meaningful view of our economic base.
What page is that?
Yeah, I think I have my notes that says it's the very next page, but I don't know if that's true.
Second paragraph under economic and demographic, Deb? Is that what you're referring to, the stricken language?
Yes.
So it is kind of dated.
Well, yeah, I mean, it would need to be updated, but I mean,
Old.
and maybe that, I don't know if is that just too much of a pain to try to update that, or?
Well, you mean comparatively?
Yeah,
Yeah, that would be difficult.
that's a piece
I
of
think.
work. Okay. All right.
I'm trying. Let me think here. Let me think this through a little bit. So, well, I could get the information from OFM on total jobs, and then look at populations.
If it's a big deal, don't. But I
Right.
mean, if it's straightforward to get, I think it kind of gives a gauge of kind of where
Between
we're
the
at.
other communities.
So,
If the commission wants me to do that, I certainly will take
we were
that up.
so much under the surrounding cities back then, and I'm guessing we may still be, but it would be interesting.
I agree with your point, Deborah. I think it's a point worth making. It does describe our city, an important element of it. I thought there was something in here about the percentage of population that work in Kenmore, and isn't that what
It's
this?
the same it's in the same sentence at
3%?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Isn't that the point? Regardless, only 3% of working Kenmore residents are employed inside the city. So, yeah, we don't have the data
Well,
on
that's a
surrounding.
little different.
Yeah, I agree. It
Oh,
doesn't
okay.
it doesn't compare, but
Yeah.
it makes very clear this is a weakness,
True.
which I think
Yeah.
is the overriding point. So I'm okay without getting the current data on that. I think the council is pretty aware of this point, though. I know we on the commission have brought it up many times. How can we get more people to work locally?
Well, or just more jobs in the city. I mean, whether there are people coming from outside.
Even better, though, to have
Yes.
people commuting very short
Right.
distances.
Yeah.
But, so that's just me, but if anybody else disagrees, that's fine. And
Now I don't know what to
apparently
do.
not. Well, I mean, Deb's made a good point, but it doesn't look like there's a majority.
I mean, yeah,
Pushing
and
for
it
it,
also
so-
sounds like it's a fair bit of work, which I would hate to have you go through. So, yeah, if it, it's one of those things. If it was just like looking up in a table, then fine. But yeah, I'm withdrawing that.
Okay.
So the last little cut, I don't have a page for it. It had to do with retail leakage.
Oh,
and
right. Uh-huh.
There was a cut on that, and I don't know where it is, actually.
It's probably under the retail demand, which is
Could-
on 4F3. Let me see here.
Yeah, here it is.
It's the last sentence in the first paragraph. While it's not unusual for a small community to experience leakage in categories such as general merchandise, apparel, Kenmore businesses only recently captured resident expenditures for groceries. Is that the one? Is that the?
Yeah. Oh, it's the one that was cut. According to analysis of retail leakage, city business captures only 105 million out of it. It was that. And I assume I'm just seeing it now. Did you cut that because it's dated?
Correct, and I
Yeah.
didn't have a
Okay.
replacement
Right.
number. Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I get it. And then the only other comment. Oh, sorry.
If you were very interested in retaining that, I would just put a date on it, but it will be the early 2000s
Right.
probably.
Right. It's a bit dated. Yeah. I mean, you've got the concept in there, so that's fine.
Okay.
And then the only other comment that isn't a cut is on back to the first page, why call out the food economy, and that's kind of a buzzword these days, so I just didn't know what was meant in this context.
Right. In that particular one, it's in the countywide planning policies. They actually have a really robust section that discusses
I'm sure they
that.
do.
So, and I know that we're going to have a few. Remember, in sustainability, we were going to have a few food policies.
Yeah.
So I thought that's where the major focus
Yeah.
is.
Now that I know it's from the county, then
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyone else? Mark?
Just one on 4F3 under future trends. So this seems to be like it's talking about the various economic development positives that we have, and the second bullet point talks about toll avoidance on the SR 520 floating bridge, and I get that that's made it a significant alternative commuter route. And has traffic implications. I'm just wondering how that's perceived as sort of an economic development advantage to Kenmore. I mean, I presumably it brings more people in, but does that mean that they stop and spend more money? I guess I didn't quite see how this fit with your talk about some of the other sort of advantages that Kenmore has.
Mm-hmm. I think what I was thinking, and I'm not sure it's clear here, is that Kenmore locationally is attractive to business that doesn't have to send their workers across the 520 bridge, so that it's a locational advantage for businesses that locate here and then do not have to face that tolling.
Oh, I see. Okay, so you're not saying that the toll avoidance. I wonder if that could be reworded somehow. I didn't quite see the.
Right, the
I see your
connection.
point. I didn't see it when
Yeah.
I read that.
Right.
I don't have any brilliant language off the top of my head. But
We can come up with something.
Well, and
Go ahead.
In light of the fact that our city manager testified recently in Olympia about the 405 tolling, maybe we need to make an inclusive, include both of those roadways, because it isn't just about getting across the 520 bridge to come to Kenmore. Actually, people don't really do that to get here. What you're saying is businesses that are located in Bellevue or Seattle. Is that what you're trying to get at?
No, it may be, see how you like this, and I like your point about the
Because that's
405
really
tolls.
a current issue that probably needs to be put in there.
So one revision I would suggest is that I could revise the sentence to say toll avoidance has made SR 522 a significant alternative commuter route, and something like, and provides Kenmore a locational advantage for business. That's what I'm getting to.
Yeah, although I don't think we want to highlight toll avoidance. We want to highlight the fact you don't get tolled.
Right, it's tolls
Toll
on
avoidance is
five.
diverting traffic, but the fact that you can
Okay.
go through, can get to and from Kenmore without paying tolls.
Right.
Okay.
is the advantage we have.
That
Yeah.
way.
And maybe not even including the actual highways that are involved. It's just our location
Yeah.
is ideal because people can get here without having to travel here on a toll road, at least for now.
Ideal might be a little strong, but preferable.
Yes. Well, we definitely have seen an increase in traffic, but how do you say that in something like this?
Yeah.
It
You don't
is-
want to say we're clogged.
We're clogged, yeah. We just want to say, hey, businesses,
Get stuck in.
Fight the 50,000 people.
it definitely belongs in this section, though, because it is about a future trend, and it's not going to go away.
Yeah, and Carol's right. I mean, just leaving it open at tolls instead of designating
Right.
the roads that are tolled means that other roads may be tolled that,
In the future.
before this is amended.
So maybe it would be a second sentence, and I'm not going to wordsmith it here, but so it would say like location on major highways and arterials. Businesses in Kenmore have a locational advantage in that you can get to and from those businesses without traveling on a toll road, something like that.
Yeah,
Does
that's
that
our point.
I'll work on the wording? Does that sound good?
Yeah.
All right.
Anything else, Mark?
Nope.
You're good? Anybody else? We're good on an economic development? We'll move on to natural
Okay.
environment.
All right, so the natural environment element, most of the significant issues for the natural environment element were reviewed with the shoreline master program work that was done in 2012. That addressed the lake, it addressed the river, it addressed the main stem of Swamp Creek. It addressed all of those associated wetlands. So it was really sort of a broad review of those significant environmentally sensitive areas. And as part of that, there was an inventory, a shoreline inventory done. And that document contained just a wealth of information about the geology of the area, the water quality of the area, et cetera. And so the information that was updated in the background section came from that document. I went back and used it extensively to update as I could. I did take out lists of species, both animal and plant. I wasn't sure that those were particularly helpful, although I did want to keep in the discussion about endangered species and protected species. So that certainly is still included. There was one policy change recommendation that I incorporated in this element, but we're going to discuss it with our next agenda item. So we can either take it up with the natural environment element or wait till we get to it. And that had to do with the policy about priorities on the shoreline, public access versus environmental protection. And then a new policy that was added had to there's already discussion of native species and the retention of native species, and because there was already discussion of it, I did add a policy about invasive weeds and toxic algae, since that's been an issue for the community of late. So those were the changes that I viewed as significant with the natural environment changes.
Okay. Comments? Objections? Deb?
Just have the one,
Yeah.
the one little one, and you might have covered it in what you just said, but there was, again, some significant cuts. The 48 and 9, is that covered in the shoreline plan that you're referencing? The
49, which one?
4D8 and 9, kind of
The water quality
the water
information
quality
and about the
issues.
fish.
Right.
Right, correct.
Okay. And
So
then 4D14, same thing.
if it was old information and I didn't feel like it was necessarily still accurate, I took it out and replaced it with the latest information I had, which was from the shoreline inventory.
Well, like I guess what I'm looking at on 4014 is the little street, well, I don't know. So you did replace that with something else. I'm just saying
Yeah.
all it's referencing is Swamp Creek, and I know there's other streams. So.
So
They-
this particular section, streams general, I did not replace. And I didn't replace this one or the previous one because I felt that what these two sections are talking about are existing regulatory conditions, which you wouldn't necessarily put in the comprehensive plan. These, the stream definitions and the classes of streams and that kind of thing are in the regulations
Okay.
that were adopted in 2006. So I don't know whether the information that is in here was a precursor and was the foundation for those regulations, but the regulations specify all of these class definitions and buffers and that kind of thing. So I did not replace it because I
Yeah.
felt like it was duplicative. And
Well,
again,
and
not
it doesn't
really
look like
comp plan
policy. It
stuff.
looks like regulation. Is what you're
Exactly.
saying. Yeah. Okay.
Anything else, Deb? You good? Mark?
On 4D1, I guess it's the first page there, under countywide planning policies, the last non-struck sentence, it refers to air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. So I guess I'm wondering, are you trying to distinguish between pollution and greenhouse gas emissions? Because some, including the Supreme Court, have characterized greenhouse gas emissions as a pollutant. So I'm just wondering if there's a reason for distinguishing between the two.
Right. I don't think that I had a reason. I think probably it distinguishes between them in the countywide planning policies. So that
Oh, is this lifted directly from that?
or this is from the countywide planning policies, right? What they're directing us to do as part of
Oh,
the
okay. So-
King County countywide planning policies.
So that's pretty much verbatim then?
I doubt if it's verbatim, but I would guess, as you know, the way I've phrased this, and I can bring the information back to you, is that there is policy direction that says we should minimize air pollution, and there's policy direction that talks about greenhouse gas emissions. I do not
Separate
remember
policy
as
directions.
separate, right? So that what they were talking about with air pollution was something different than greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay.
And I do recall that there was a whole section on greenhouse gas emissions. And I don't think air pollution in the
Right.
traditional sense was discussed there.
Okay, so we're not trying to make any kind of statement about the relative,
No.
whether greenhouse gas is a pollutant?
No,
That's a
no,
pretty fraught,
absolutely no. That
argument.
was
Okay.
certainly not my intent.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. I wonder if there's any way to make that clear, more clear in the wording then.
So,
What's that? Well, if they were separate, yeah, I would thought about including two, but if they're separate in the plan. If no one else thinks that's an issue, then does anybody else think that's an issue?
Well, could you just change the word "and" to "including"? I mean,
I like kind of having them both in there.
having them
That's
separate.
if that's
Okay.
what the policies
Yeah,
state.
okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
and we're just repeating the policy.
And in fact, you know, when you deal with environmental law and what's defined as a hazardous material, it's not as broad as greenhouse gas emissions. CO2 is a greenhouse gas emission, isn't it?
Right, but there have been cases,
Ability
yeah,
for
there have
moving
been cases
CO2.
where, yeah, there have been cases where, like I say, the Supreme Court has ruled that it is regulatable under the Clean Air Act. So there are, some different legal.
Right, but then having it in there separately broadens, I think. We have
That's true.
pollutants and
Yeah.
we have greenhouse
Yeah.
gas emissions
Yeah.
to address that. So I think we're better, I think your point is better made by leaving them separate.
Okay, then I'm.
Somebody said including, if that would make it acceptable to minimize air pollution, including greenhouse gas emissions, just a
Anybody?
thought, I certainly don't have a concern there if that would satisfy.
It is, sometimes it is, and sometimes it may not be. But if you have them both in there, then it's something, then it's a policy of concern, right?
Right?
I think it's broader without saying including.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
Okay, I'm fine with that.
You're okay with it? And I'm not getting a read from anybody else, so I guess we're okay with it.
I just had one other, just a second. It's, let's see, on 4D-15 talks about the water quality issues, and just wondering what sort of water quality, regulatory authority the city has over that, and specifically the fecal coliform bacteria, is that mostly handled, in terms of, development regulations, or?
The development regulations come from our surface and stormwater management practices, which try to address, I'm not sure if fecal coliform is specifically addressed, but the water quality issue is handled by others, right?
So there is some tie in for surface water that the city does monitor water quality. I think in specifically Swamp Creek is of concern, but we have to partner with other agencies for regulatory authority as well.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
anyone else? Angela?
I have a question about the air quality section about future conditions on 4D8. It says that air quality in Kenmore is predicted to remain much as it is today or to improve slightly. This is based on the continuation of the state vehicle emissions inspection and monitoring program and decreased dependence on wood as a primary heating source. Do you know how this was determined or predicted? Because I understand if vehicle inspections previously weren't required and now emissions testing is required, I understand that. But if we are seeing an increase in vehicles in our area, might that also be reason to believe that our air quality might decrease?
It is, and I don't have the scientific data. I would say that there are a number of things that work to improve air quality, vehicle emission standards even for new vehicles, the ongoing testing program. I think that the land use pattern and the focus on transit, the transit improvements that have been made in the region. All those things to me speak to potential improvement. But I don't have vehicle miles traveled. I don't have more data than that. I just, I think it was a gut feeling that this language from the old plan was probably still true, but it's a gut feeling, and I don't know how, when this was first put together, where that data came from.
Okay. The whole section on air quality is just so broad because it speaks mostly about King County. I just wish it was a little more specific to Kenmore.
Yeah, we don't.
We don't have the data,
We don't.
scientific data to support what the air quality specifically is in Kenmore, so we have to kind of broaden it and assume that Kenmore is sort of pretty similar to King County.
Okay.
It's as good as we can get at this
Just
point.
lick our thumb and stick it in the air.
Anything else? Anyone? I had a comment on 4D25. Policy LU-13.5.1, it's the last paragraph on the page. The new language adds to the urban forestry strategy, and we had asked that that be put on a future docket item for the commission, so we can talk about balancing views with trees, but this sort of jumps ahead of, I think, what may be it may be obsolete after we go through that, revisiting the urban forestry strategy, because this says it encourages planting of new native trees on public and private properties. I think until we size it all up, it's unwise to take a position on it. So I'd like to strike it. Anybody, I guess we got to get some agreement on that. Any agreement on that? Have a nod?
I like it in there.
Have a no? 2 yes, 1 no.
This is existing language, right?
No, the
yellow's
last
the new
part of that,
language.
as well as the planting of new native trees on public and private properties, was sort of an acknowledgement that the city's current strategy is protection of existing trees, but also allows, when trees are being cut for new development, requires a planting of new trees. And so that's why this phrase was added, but I'm
Well, it goes beyond
comfortable
allows.
striking it.
It says encourages. And I just think it's better suited for an overall assessment before we take
That's
a policy
fine.
position on
The
it.
commission agrees, that's,
Well, we only have 2 and 1. 3? Okay.
okay.
We have a
Agree.
maybe.
All right, so
We have a
we'll
reluctant
strike
for it.
that last.
Enough to get.
It will show up on a docket in the future, we hope.
Right, I think it's good to take it up. I think it's a reasonable proposal, but I think in the context of an overall policy, instead of just putting it in as if we reached a conclusion already.
Okay. Okay?
Anybody else have a comment on natural environment? All right, we're good.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Oh.
Similar language occurs both in the objective as well as the policy,
Right.
it seems.
Oh, let's look at the
Encourage
objective.
the preservation and planting of trees on public and private property.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but that's existing, so I was really I was looking at the new language. So
in
you're
the
right,
existing-
though,
in
if we're-
existing language, it says encourages the preservation and protection of trees on public and private. And the new language introduces the word planting. And then in the existing objective, it had planting, but there wasn't any language in the policy.
Well, there is. LU 1352 on the next page.
But that's on street trees, which is different, I assume.
Correct.
Yeah, it's true.
Right.
Not as broad.
Yeah.
Mike, are you proposing they strike planting from the objective?
To be consistent with what we're saying, no, I'm not. I guess I wanted to restrain my feedback tonight to the changes, which I thought wise. I was just calling that out as an
Yeah, you're right.
observation.
No, I didn't catch it because I was focused on the changes too. I mean, it would make sense if we're going to take it up as a broader issue in the context of views that we would strike it for now.
It's fine. Again, if,
So I'd be inclined to be consistent.
I would be inclined to leave it as is, and if you want to strike the change, that seems okay. I mean, you've got two policies. One deals with planting and one deals with preservation, and that fits the objective right now. So,
I think that is a fair interpretation of the objective, that the encouragement of preservation is regarding public and private trees, and the planting is specific to street trees.
But in the objective, it's broader.
Maybe.
It seems to me that our current policy and the way the city is operating is to encourage planting of trees. If we're going to have a future consideration, an issue related to planting of trees related to view protection, I think that's a more limited question and certainly worth being brought up. But I don't know that there's enough here related to views to say that we would change because this is policy. We're not saying we're going to change, the city's going to change what it's doing right now. So I think continuing to state what the city's current policy is and what we're going to continue to do is appropriate. And if we're going to come back and look at the more limited question of is there need to be balance between trees and views, that's something we do in the future. But I don't know that the language we have in here now needs to be removed to present some kind of bias or some differential between what we intend to do and what we are in fact doing.
Right.
So I would leave all of the language as it is right now, and then we can come back and look at trees versus views and change that language after we've had that consideration.
Okay. Anybody want to change a vote on this one? So I think we have 4 in favor of striking the change language, but I don't think we have 4 in favor of changing the existing language. Is that right?
Right. I think.
Okay. The world of compromise. All right, so natural element satisfied, natural environment satisfied. We move on to capital facilities.
Okay, so the capital facilities element, this is kind of a technical element. It does have goals, objectives, and policies in it. But in this particular element, we tried to clarify the relationship between the long-term, their sort of fiscally unconstrained 20-year plans and the 6-year capital improvement program, so that in the element, those 20-year tables would be brought forward, and those were approved with the transportation element and the parks element and the surface water element. You've seen that. You've already endorsed those, and the City Council has approved them. So those tables would move forward into the element. And then each year, annually, the 6-year CIP would be placed in the element. This is one of those elements that you can amend more than once a year because you're doing it in cycle with the budget. So we tried to clarify that. We wrote in some new language about concurrency and impact fee approaches. That's an issue that is going to be taken up through the Public Works Department this year as a follow-on to the transportation element that was adopted by Council last year. And those, I guess, were the comments that I wanted to make for this one.
Anybody have a response? Deborah, I saw your hand move. Okay. I had one. 11-3, middle of the page, essential public facilities.
Correct.
So you list 3 essential public facilities, the second of which is 522, the first of which is Kenmore Air.
Right.
So I would think that 522 is a little more essential than Kenmore Air, so let's at least put it first. And I would think if we're going to infrastructure, that maybe we should talk about the other arterials, we should talk about the Burt-Gilman Trail, we should talk about the parks, we should talk about St. Ed's. They're at least as essential, I think, as Kenmore Air, and they're on almost a par with 522.
Yeah, I would say that essential public facilities, that is a specifically defined term in the state rules. So although these may be very valuable facilities to the city or in the operation of the community, I don't think they rise to the level of an essential public facility as defined in the Growth Management Act. Kenmore Air Harbor actually is, and airports are identified as an essential public facility. 522 as a state highway would be. And in fact, if you go back to the very beginning of this element on page 1, in the second paragraph under Growth Management Act requirements, it talks about what essential public facilities are. And it says, essential public facilities include those facilities that are typically difficult to cite, such as airports, state education facilities, and state or regional transportation facilities, regional transit authority facilities, state and local correctional facilities, solid waste, handling facilities and inpatient facilities, including substance abuse facilities, mental health facilities, group homes, and secure community transition facilities. So it's kind of a defined
Yeah.
term.
I see your point. Can we put 522 first?
Is that
Is there
everybody's
agreement on that?
Okay, we'll move that to the first bullet point.
And on the third
Go ahead, Mike.
On the third bullet point, several adult family homes and group homes, is adult a modifier there for group homes as well, or is that a separate thing?
Adult family homes are a specific thing. It's like senior housing.
Group homes could be foster homes for children?
Group homes, again, are state-defined facilities. They can be for folks living together with disabilities or that kind of thing.
Any other comments? Nobody? Yeah, Deb.
So I guess sort of on that same page there, a couple of what was considered an essential public facility are crossed out now, but they're still there, right? I mean, like the treatment
They're
plant.
still there, but I didn't think that they met the definition.
Well, the wastewater treatment plant is, that's part of the definite. That's in the definition.
So
state
the
definition.
Brightwater, we should reference the toll, not the toll, the...
No, that second one, that the DNR wastewater treatment, the pump station, and the Swamp Creek trunk line, that whole. Those are very difficult to cite. I would think those would definitely meet that threshold.
Okay. I
Do
can
we have
add that
agreement
back
on
in.
that? With Deb's point? I tend to agree.
Yes.
Okay.
But
Okay.
is it highlighted in a different section, or is it just because it's under the growth management definitions? I guess I'm a little confused. Okay, so these are forecasted future needs.
So these are existing essential public facilities. And Deborah's point is that these exist and that because they're related to wastewater, they should be included as part of our definition of essential public facilities, because it does, it talks about solid waste handling facilities. I was thinking more of Brightwater, but these are, I suppose, components of the solid waste handling facility. So I'm comfortable leaving it in. I think I saw a majority of heads nodding.
Right.
Okay. So that was the second bullet point that starts King County DNR. Okay, all right.
Anything else? Deborah?
On 1126, does that make any sense? Yes, it does. I was just curious why we cut the level of service standards, or maybe they're being replaced.
The level of service standards where they are used for different facilities are discussed in the other elements.
Okay, that's what I figured.
So,
Okay.
for example, we had some conversation about how police used to be a person per thousand thing, and now they don't assign that anymore. So there's no police level of service.
Right.
But in the transportation element, certainly, there is level of service information about how that is.
And similarly, this may be the same answer. The implementation strategies or suggestions were all crossed out. They're referenced maybe in the specific sections?
So
or
it's
like 1134 forward.
Right. So those were talking about the tool and the mechanism that's used to address concurrency and impact fees.
Right.
And so there's a whole chapter in the municipal code that talks about how impact fees are assessed and that kind of thing. So rather than outline this all here about how you review development applications, there's just a single implementation measure at the top of page 1134
Yes,
that
right.
talks about reviewing
Concurrency,
impact fee
right.
approaches and level of service.
Right.
All right, are we good on capital facilities? Great, that was pretty good, pretty efficient. Next on the agenda is revised policies from previous reviews.
Okay, so this one is kind of a hodgepodge, I don't know how else to phrase it, of issues that we had discussed at one point, and then the idea was that I would bring back language or provide additional information for you to look at before final approval of that language. So if you have your materials in front of you, again, this is broken out by element, and we can either do it by exception, or I can go through and describe each one, whichever you'd prefer.
Do we have a preference? I'm inclined to go by exception.
Yeah, I think that worked good.
So does anybody want to, we'll go kind of element by element and see if anybody has any response or comment to the proposed language. Public services. Anybody? Yes, Deb?
That's the only one I had a comment on, and it just seemed, I mean, I know it's policy and not regulation, but it did seem kind of overly vague. Encourage citizens to be prepared for natural disasters. I mean, I know at the county level, I mean, there's like, specific plans, there's, what do they call it, chain of command kind of thing. There's just...
Right, at the city
So-
level, too. There's same
So
thing.
do we want to allude to that at all, or?
I don't, so the goal here, the request from the commission was to add in a policy about citizen involvement in emergency preparedness. And so the objective, which is in the paragraph before, says establish an emergency management office and system. And that seemed to really be directed toward the city and the city's role in emergency management. So then
Okay.
the desire was to put in a policy about sort of the citizens' role in emergency preparedness.
Okay, and I think I missed that nuance, the bullet as opposed to the highlighted language, because
Right.
I was preceded when I was here, so, yeah.
So you're
I'm
okay.
fine, yeah.
Okay, good. So no other exceptions on that one. Next item is utilities. Comments, exceptions? See none. Next element.
Doug,
Yes,
I'm
please.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
My
Don't apologize.
Wi-Fi is not working very well
Oh.
for some reason. I can't pull that up. But actually, going back to the one that Deborah brought up, I think I'm the one who pointed that out at the last meeting.
Yeah, could be.
And I think maybe I didn't explain myself well, because I guess I was thinking more of maybe citizens' involvement, but still a relation to, thank you, to the city. So sorry, let me just review this. Okay. Yeah, I guess I was thinking that, the city would establish an emergency management office and system, educate citizens about I don't know, I guess I wasn't thinking of the second half, which was encourage citizens to be prepared, but it's more about like educating citizens about what the city has in the event of an emergency.
Right. So the second bullet really gets to the idea that citizens need to be personally responsible for their own issues for some period of time, for example, if there was an earthquake. So I know you all have seen 72 hours, you're going to have enough food, you're going to have enough water, because the systems could potentially be down. So that's why the second piece of that is in there, because along with the education about, well, what kind of hazards does Kenmore face, what are our most significant hazards, there's another part to that, which is that the city itself is not going to be necessarily able to help individual citizens if there is a major disaster, that in fact people need to take a level of personal responsibility and have their emergency care kit and all those kinds of things. So that was that's why the second half of that sentence is in there.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Mark?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I had a couple on the utilities one.
You guys, you don't have to apologize.
Okay, I'm not sorry then. I retract that statement.
Actually making good time.
No, that second, her explanation made sense.
Policy you 49.1.4 on the second page. You referenced the current service provider. Is there a reason you have the word current in there?
Only because the service providers change. So I was thinking...
Okay. Oh, so you're trying to say whoever is the current service provider. Okay.
Right.
Okay. So that covers whoever the service provider may be.
And it could be just current could be removed, and it could say coordinate with service providers. If it's confusing to have current in there, we should take it out.
I found it a little confusing personally. But.
Okay.
But isn't that covered by contract with the city? So saying current actually ties it into the contracts that the city has with those providers. Is that right?
That is another way to read it. That's probably the way I wrote it, but I'm happy either way, whatever the commission is comfortable with.
Current kind of ties it in time to the date of the plan, so I guess I would suggest, I don't know, kind of along Mark's line, but.
So just to clarify, this statement pertains to the service contracts that the city has. This comprehensive plan is basically going to be put in place for 10 years? 20 years. Mm-hmm. So making a statement about the current service providers just reminds the reader in some ways that the city might not have the same service provider that they did when we wrote the comprehensive plan. It's just it's just pointing that out. I guess it doesn't need to be pointed out.
Could we just say contracted service providers then or something? I mean,
yeah, we could.
Yeah.
We could say contracted service providers because that is an element of date too.
Yeah.
Oh. Current could be read to mean the current whoever at any given time. I'm just saying, your concern, Deb, was current might be dated, quickly obsolete, because people might read that to say some previous provider in 2015. And I think that's an assumption.
I see what you're saying. So you think that it
Yeah,
makes
it's sort of like
it more...
toll roads, without
Yeah.
identifying them. It's broad enough to include any that in the future might be.
So the current is kind of redundant because
Yeah.
the contracts are going to talk about that. The comprehensive plan doesn't necessarily have to. It just is talking about the service providers. The contracts are the specifics. This is just the big picture.
So I've heard three versions. One version leaves alone. The second one says coordinate with contracted service providers to ensure that safe hazardous waste disposal is promoted. And the third version I heard was coordinate with service providers to ensure.
Why are we adding contract? Is that your proposal?
Well, if people wanted some modifier in there, I don't think we need it. I would just take out current.
Right.
I make a motion
So
to take out current.
I would take out current.
Or
too.
if you take out current.
Yeah.
Okay. Coordinate with
Can't go wrong.
I'm going to change it to service providers
Yeah.
with an S. All right.
Mike.
On that same policy, what does the word promoted mean in the sentence?
The intent was that most of the solid waste providers have a facility, for example, for hazardous waste disposal, and they educate that, or they provide educational materials related to that, so that their customers know, and it's promoted that they take that material rather than throwing it in their garbage to whatever the appropriate location is. So the provider itself does not deal with the disposal of hazardous waste except at their facility. So they are promoting where citizens should take their materials and dispose of them appropriately.
It took me a few readings to get that.
Yeah.
I think I ultimately understood that's where that policy was going.
It's
This is a
We could say,
policy statement for the city of Kenmore to coordinate with the service provider to market or promote or to educate the citizens of
Yeah.
Kenmore on the availability, right? There's a whole lot in here,
right.
and it's condensed, and I love the brevity, but it requires a lot of mental agility on behalf of the reader, because it took me 3 or 4 readings to kind of get that. So I don't know.
Would it be better to replace we could say to educate citizens about safe hazardous waste disposal?
It would.
Yes.
Do you like that?
Yeah, an active language instead of just to ensure that this will happen. I mean, you want the provider to actually do something. You want them to educate. So,
Okay.
Mark, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I just had U-50 to 1.4, the new sentence there. Certainly, that's what our discussions indicated about excellent utility service. I wondered if we wanted to define excellent, reliable, affordable. If we wanted to get just a hair more specific than excellent. I mean, that's certainly what we want, but that's kind of a broad term. I just wondered if that was something we could just reword. If we could agree on what the components of excellence are, reliability, certainly, affordability, I think would be up there for most people. Safe, but then if we get too many words, maybe it gets too long. So,
well, what did you mean?
I meant, reliable, affordable, safe, utility service. If I'm missing anything, then if it gets any much longer, probably maybe excellent is the word to use. But
Anybody want to?
Anybody have any
proposal?
specific? What does excellent mean to you as a utility customer?
You could just say excellent service, or you could say the highest standards available.
Yeah, Mike.
I think highest suffers from exactly the same
It
problem.
does.
Excellent
Right.
is completely unenforceable and undefinable. I think to elevate the language, you would have to say to meet the highest tier of industry standards. I don't know if that's meaningful language, but I think you would have to tie this to some meaningful metric, which we could.
That's
probably-
Which would be suitable for a law, but I think I'm okay with it as
Yeah,
a policy.
yeah.
Just saying excellent, because the point's made in the briefest way.
Yeah, I think that's where we get a little tangled, is we have to remember that this is the comprehensive plan. It's not the law.
But Mike just, phrased a very good legal standard, highest industry standard.
Right, that's kind of what I was
Exactly
getting to,
how things
too,
like
but-
these are written.
Yeah, we might not be able to
That's why
afford
Mike's
that
here.
service.
No, you're dead on, but I think for a comp plan, I'm okay
Yeah.
with excellent.
I mean, the point is certainly made. I just wonder if it would be stronger with specific language, but if it is, that's fine.
Well, and I mean, is affordable part of the industry standard? See, that I kind of like what Mark said,
Well-
because he called out not just reliability, which is probably part of an industry standard, but also affordability, which I'm guessing is not. So,
Yeah, that's in the eye of the beholder, so that gets a little difficult to.
yeah, that's true too.
So maybe just leaving it one word simple, maybe that's the best we can do in this,
I think it's suitable for this.
planning.
Excellent can be.
Actually go farther than you think. I mean,
Yeah.
it covers more ground than just
Right.
Excellent
affordable.
could be affordable to some and high performance to others.
Yeah, that's true.
I might also point out that there was a concern about customer service, which also is incorporated in the notion of excellent.
Okay.
So whenever the franchise agreements get redone, you know what we're looking for. Right? Clear as mud.
And that'll have specific language.
Right, yeah. That's all I
right.
had, thank you.
Are we good there? Mark is good. Anyone else? Want to add anything else? We're good on that one. That was the utilities. So the next one is downtown sub-element. A little bit of new language. Any comments? Proposals? Reaction?
Looks good.
Okay. Carol's on board. I'm on board. Anybody else on board? A lot of boarding here. Next one is community design sub-element. Comment? Reaction? Mark?
Just one minor edit. Techniques and methods seems kind of redundant. We could perhaps just use one of those two. I don't have any favorite, but
I like it. I like brevity. I think it is redundant for the most part. Anybody else?
Is there a difference between techniques and methods?
See, that you even have to ask. Makes Mark's point.
It does, but it's I'm not an architect or a builder, so I don't know. That's why I asked that question.
Yeah, it's a fair question. I suspect methods is a little broader, but I think
Yeah,
they both serve the purpose.
I think techniques has to do with the strategies that you're taking, like you're going to do a green roof, or you're going to approach it a certain technique to achieve what you want, and then the method is more like how you do it. This is just me speaking. So there may be methods of construction that are more related to green buildings. So, for example, you are going to recycle your waste, or you're going to do something. But the difference is probably minuscule.
you could just say support green building, right? I mean, because all those are incorporated into
I like it.
green building. Just
Broad,
It's very broad.
unassailable.
Visionary.
Unassailable. Visionary.
yeah.
Okay,
That's
so
why
is
Mark's
that
on the council.
Yeah, visionary.
is that where we're
I like it.
okay? 1, 2, 3, 4. Do I see 4 heads? Okay.
Keep it simple.
Okay.
All right, so that's community design. We're on to natural environment as a sub-element. This is where we get to the good part, right? You were
Right. So I might
You're,
just comment
promising.
on on this one. So on February 3rd, you all asked, the natural environment element was an attachment to another agenda item. And at that time, a motion was made, and then you accepted striking of this last sentence. Protection of critical areas should take priority over visual values and physical access. So as I was reading through the Shoreline Master Program, looking at the inventory and that kind of thing, I wanted to suggest that we just change that slightly. So the idea is here, protection of critical areas should be balanced with visual values and physical access, as long as there is no net adverse impact to shoreline ecological processes and functions. That's just the way the public access sections in the Shoreline Master Program read, so that there's no question that if you've decided that the public access it needs to take priority, you're also acknowledging that that you're going to mitigate for whatever negative impacts you might have. So,
I think Commissioner Vanderline has fond memories of this discussion from 2009.
Actually, I think I've blocked most of
Right?
it out.
You what? You forgot most of it?
Repeat the whole thing.
Test at the end of the day, Mike.
My comment on this was the wording, as long as there is no net adverse impact to, I would add, regulated shoreline ecological processes and functions.
Yeah, but I think it's all regulated
Well,
by virtue of having.
just knowing the experience we've had of people
Yeah.
coming up with very creative ways to talk about what impacts the shoreline and what doesn't,
Yeah.
I think what we're saying is regulated gives some reasonable limit to this. And
I'm fine with it. But I'm fine with your proposal. I like your point. It reflects the intent of the Shoreline Management Act.
right.
All right?
So.
Oh, yeah, regulated. I'm good with it. Anybody else?
I think regulated is an excellent addition because then it does tie in with the other recommendation that you made.
Does somebody mind giving a little context? I think this proceeded when I was appointed.
It post-dated when you were appointed.
It was after? So
Yeah,
we
we
talked
did the shoreline, we revised the shoreline master program as opposed to plan. About 2009. We had a
Oh,
citizens
right, yeah,
advisory
but I
committee.
mean, yeah, the discussion was before I got appointed this time.
Oh,
so-
I think it came up. I think I brought it up while you were on the
Oh.
commission, but
Anyway, could somebody give a little context to this? I mean, just,
well,
I don't know what regulated shoreline, I don't know what you're proposing, I guess. I don't understand the background of why you'd restrict it.
I will make my abbreviated version of what I think we discussed and why we got there. There was originally, as we were going through the shoreline master plan, we had testimony and advice from the Environmental Protection Agency, which led us into a rather restricted view of what you could do within the shoreline or could not do.
DOE, I think.
DOE, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
that's right. And specifically, we had in our idea, in other work that we had done, that we wanted to increase the public's access to the shoreline to be able to have things like trails, paths, and potentially even things like limited and controlled access for kayak landings and things like this.
Right.
Beach. We had gotten a strong pushback from DOE, as I recall, that said, no, you can't disturb this in any way. Maybe you could have something at a far distance. You could build towers so somebody could climb up and see something at a distance, but you can't disturb this in any way. So what that led to was some very interesting discussion, which evolved eventually into we need to have some balance here. And I think eventually we learned that the interpretation that we had heard and we'd come to believe was true was maybe not as strict
Right,
as interpretations needed to be.
Yeah.
So I think that's the language that we're putting in here.
Okay.
My wanting to add regulated to this is there's very specific rules about what can and cannot happen within the shoreline. I think there's a lot of good thinking that's gone into what those are. It doesn't say that you can't do nothing within the shoreline, but it's very specific about what you can do. So I wanted to add the word regulated here so we don't have somebody coming in and say, well, this taking us back to you can't do anything. No, we can do things that are okay in terms of regulation. And so that's what I was trying to get at here.
We okay?
And
Yeah,
some-
I mean, I think the state and local regulations that exist are pretty clear about what you can and can't do and what you need to do if you do encroach and you have to mitigate. And so, I mean, we've got to, that's why I was just, it seems redundant to say regulation, but I don't have a problem with it. So,
I guess maybe to help with a specific example, and this will be exaggerated just because I don't know how else to
Make
do
the
it.
point.
Make a point.
Just to make the
I mean, we could easily, I could see, have someone come in and say, what you're proposing to do there would have an adverse impact on my view of what the nature should look like. We begin to drift into that any encroachment is against God's will. And thou shalt not do that.
yeah.
Now, how do you argue against that? Because you have a heartfelt belief here. But if you can go back and say, well, we're proposing to do here is allowed under regulation.
Right.
What you're saying we can't do is not restricted by regulation. Our policy says that we're looking at regulated uses. That, at least in my mind, hopefully buys us out of that discussion one more time.
And so you're talking about, right, okay, so now I get it. Okay, as long as there is no net adverse impact to, you're talking about the regulated processes and function, not the regulated shoreline, because the whole shoreline is regulated. Okay, I was just having trouble with where the modifier was in the sentence, actually. Now I get it.
Are we clear, Lori?
Could you read that back to us?
Right. Okay, protection of critical areas should be balanced with visual values and physical access as long as there is no net adverse impact to regulated shoreline ecological processes and functions.
I'm fine with it. Are we good? We're good?
Okay.
Get it.
We're good.
Yay.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. That was
Next,
a very
PROS, near and dear to our hearts. Do we have responses, comments, proposals?
Look at this.
The staff does not believe any additional policies are warranted.
Oh, right.
We were so thorough 2 years ago. Anybody? We're good?
good.
All right. So the next item on the agenda is regional transportation policies.
Okay, so as you know, on March 16th, the City Council asked the Planning Commission to consider adding in a couple of new policies into the transportation element, which we're not otherwise making changes to address two things: high-capacity transit and water-based transportation. So these were the staff recommendations, these two new policies that would go under Objective T41, which supports expansion of local and regional transit service within Kenmore that provides linkages to regional destinations.
Objection, response, comment, Mark?
All right, I was just a little curious.
Just see. Without you raising your hand. The thought bubble.
The thought bubble, yeah. Please don't puncture that bubble before it's up. So the first one. So it talks about supporting high-capacity transit service, preferably light rail. Are there other viable options beyond light rail?
Yes.
Is there a specific reason why you use that pretty specific language?
Right.
That was my question.
So in the Sound Transit Long Range Plan, this corridor is identified as a high-capacity transit corridor, but that could mean light rail. It could be like rapid. I don't know if you're familiar with the rapid ride service along Aurora, the express bus, and sometimes even really frequent bus service. Regular bus service is considered high-capacity transit. So it was specifically the distinction that rail versus a bus option was preferable.
Was preferable. Okay, so that's where that came from.
Right.
Okay. I was also wondering about these policies. They're kind of one sentence. I guess in the policy there isn't a need, or is there, to talk about how these might be accomplished? There's a lot of references, in the Rob's memo about coordination and collaboration and working in partnership with it. So a one sentence policy is sufficient for this purpose, rather than defining in the policy how that might.
I think so at this point.
At this point?
Again, this policy would be looking to the future, and we already have policies in there about coordination and working with the other agencies.
Right.
It would definitely be a collaborative effort, and I don't think we know enough at this point to get really specific. It's more like, okay, we generally think that light rail along SR 522 is something we want to support, so we'll go talk to Sound Transit about that. But that conversation, who knows where it's going to go? It may be that there's no way, you could never have the ridership, or, well, we'd like it, but the location of where it would have to be is not desirable for the community. I mean, there are a lot of decision points in that kind of a discussion. So I would hesitate to get any more specific.
So keep it as broad as possible to keep your options. Okay, that
Right.
sounds, I just wondered about that, so thank you.
All right. Any comment on the ferry language? Debbie, did you get any more info on?
I did, and I was trying to find my
Oh,
notes
thanks.
for that.
You're lucky.
There was a meeting with King County, and they've been tasked this year to update information for more of a water taxi service. And so Kenmore had expressed interest, and yes, we're still interested in exploring the options in the city, and there are some areas that might make sense to look at for a potential landing site or launching site. And again, we're looking at that saying, things have changed since that original study was done several years ago. For example, there has been, the tolling, for example, has increased traffic, so people are looking for other options. Commuter traffic on the Burt Gilman has increased. The city's sort of promoting more density in the downtown. So there's some sort of facts that have changed in people's commute patterns and travel patterns, and the city's planning for density that might make Kenmore a good candidate for a water taxi service for people who want to get downtown. So that's sort of the conversation that we had. So King County are pursuing updating this study, and they have a consultant on board to take a look at some of the logistics and what that would involve. But there is no actual funding at this point to make it happen. That would then have to be brought forward in the next budget cycle with King County to see if there's any money to bring it forward. But I guess the interest is there, and there has been some money allocated by King County to study it, but the implementation piece is to be determined, I guess.
So did anybody ever ask King County or anybody at King County, when did this go from being a completely completely unfeasible financially, which was essentially the conclusion reached 5 or so years ago, to, hey, let's give it some more thought?
I think they're taking a look at what things have changed in those intervening years that warrant taking another hard look at it as being an option for alternative modes of transportation.
All right.
I do think that there's a difference between a passenger ferry and a water taxi. At least in my mind, those are two very different things, and that a passenger ferry may be a much more expensive, bigger operation. The boats are bigger, etc. Whereas a water taxi is pretty limited in size.
You mean the proposal that failed was a water taxi proposal?
No, the proposal that failed was a passenger ferry.
But this says passenger ferry or other.
Right, and the discussion that's going on now is about a water taxi.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
All right. Yes, Mike.
With new policy E41.4, I might make the suggestion that we strike downtown from in front of Kenmore. I don't think it restricts it, and it's kind of hard to say if we were to get a light rail station on 522 exactly where it would go. If we do say downtown, I think we're saying it's going to go right there. Yeah. Right? As opposed to...
Well, not exactly, just because as we discussed a little bit earlier, downtown in its broadest sense is quite a large area. It goes to 73rd. There's some maps that actually show the Kenmore Square area as part of downtown, and then it heads farther to it doesn't go much beyond the existing commercial development here on the west side, and then it's also on the south side, so Lake Point and that area around 68th and the plywood supply area. So it doesn't mean the northwest quadrant here that we think of as the core of downtown. It means that bigger area. I guess I would not recommend that we make it too broad, because I'm not sure that we would want it either at the far east or west ends of the city, just because of the relationship. I mean, if for example, the light rail station were located where the strip mall is on 61st, That's quite a distance from downtown Kenmore, and maybe isn't going to be as supportive of the vision for the downtown that is expressed in the vision statement.
Okay.
Just a thought.
Counterpoint?
Anybody else? Comment? Boy, I tell you what, if we get a light rail station, they could put it anywhere, I'd be thrilled.
Yeah.
I'm inclined to strike downtown and get whatever we can out of it. And if it's a 61st, and they're going to have sidewalks to 61st, my
Right.
understanding from the
Again,
522.
I'm not the one. If you all want to take
I
out
would strike
downtown,
it
I'm
and say-
totally cool with it.
That
I
was
put
exactly my
please-
point, to be a shared resource.
We'll
with
take
Lake Forest.
anything, if you want to put that in there, I'd go with it.
So I'll stand.
We're
by
not
my-
choosy,
Yeah, I'll stand by my
would be
motion.
good, I
You wanna
think.
Put it to the vote to strike down.
Well, I'm good with it. If you're still willing to strike it, we got 2, 3 for Mark.
Yeah, this doesn't bind you, right? I mean,
Maybe.
it doesn't
No,
say,
uh-uh.
it doesn't, there's no binding
Preference.
Right.
I agree.
nature of the language, so.
It's just
I-
preference,
I-
right?
I
Isn't
think
that-
that
If they want to put it at Arrowhead Elementary, that's
Arrow-
fine.
I will walk to Arrowhead.
Yeah, right, yeah.
I would walk
Council
to
members would love-
Kenmore Junior High.
There you go.
Right.
That's where it is. I would do it.
Politics at its finest. There you go.
They have a bike and ride, bike park and ride would be good. Anything they want to do. Has it, Rob said essentially it's not likely to happen in our lifetimes.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Just to get it in my lifetime, I would. My backyard is available if they want to put it there.
We'll let
That'd be
them
great.
know.
Think about it. Think about it.
So
All right.
did I see a majority of nodding heads? We'll take out downtown.
Sure. In our lifetime?
I would leave it because it's just expressing a preference.
Yeah, not just
So-
my lifetime. In her lifetime. That's what we're really worried about. All right.
I think I have to see
Are
the
we in or out with this?
in and out with
Strike downtown?
Yeah.
it. Right.
Strike. Do we have 4? I thought I'd seen
I'm
like,
good for
this is
strike.
like
Okay.
bobblehead
2, 3,
night.
4.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's- Everybody's bobbing here.
The details later.
Okay.
All right. Is that satisfied the regional transportation policies?
What did we decide on the ferry service? We need to have a policy.
We have it. I mean, their proposed language is 415, T415.
Yes, this is
I think we're in agreement on it.
right there.
Oh, okay, I see it, thank you.
Yeah. All right.
We can't have the colloquial anymore.
We had our chance.
Pieced out.
As attractive as it was. The next item on the agenda, discussion of April 20 joint meeting and April 21 public hearing.
So I think the purpose of the joint meeting is not to present the Planning Commission's recommendations, because at that point you won't have had your public hearing. So the purpose of the joint meeting is to highlight some of the substantive changes that will be included in the comprehensive plan amendments that you will be considering at your public hearing, in case the council say that's great, and as you're having your deliberation after the public hearing, please talk about A, B, C. So it will give the council an opportunity to sort of have a precursor of what's coming, what you'll be looking at your public hearing, and an opportunity to give you some preliminary comments and feedback before you give them your formal recommendation in June.
Do we need to prepare anything?
We're certainly prepared to give sort of that general overview to the council, highlighting those substantive changes. And in the materials, we will be including the background factual information updated. We won't be presenting that in strike-through as you have seen it as a commission, for the very purpose of that we felt we didn't want the focus to be on that background information. We want the focus to be on the goals, policies, and objectives. So that's how we're going to present it. Is the background information factual has been updated, has been reviewed by the Planning Commission, but we really want to talk about these substantive changes. So that's sort of the how we are anticipating presenting this, and we're certainly willing to do that as a staff, and then have the Planning Commission jump in and comment as needed. And I think what we're trying to do is we want to kind of make sure that the council are not hearing this as this is your formal recommendation. It really isn't at this point. So we're happy to, I'm looking at Laurie, we're happy to bear the burden of presenting this information to the council and having the Planning Commission there as sort of a resource or to respond to any questions or comments that the council brings up.
Sounds like we don't need to present anything. That you guys make the presentation,
Exactly.
they respond, we take it in, and we give
Right.
our individual responses to what they might
So
say.
if that makes sense to you, sort of the rationale of the material that we're presenting and how we're presenting it and what your role is, we're just, I guess, looking for a agreement on that's what will happen on the 20th.
Yeah, works for me.
We're going to talk about the 21st too. You're going to let us know what happens separate.
Right, and
Yeah, okay.
I just
Before we
want-
get there, go ahead.
I was just going to say, on the 20th, we are certainly not taking the whole package. The whole package will be ready for the public hearing, but for this meeting with the City Council, as you recall, last September when they set out the agenda, the housing element, the public services element, the utilities element, the vision statement, and then there were those policies, the sustainability and healthy living policies. Those were the ones we called out to them, and they concurred were the real focus. So that's what we're taking forward at this point. And then when you move forward with your final recommendation after your public hearing, then we'll take the whole document to the council with these elements that you've just gone through in the last couple of meetings, which are really substantively minor changes.
So my comment here, by way of guidance for these joint meetings, I know you all have been to one already. As you know, the mayor will be the chair of that meeting. You have to get his recognition before you can speak. But just remember, too, that when you speak, you'll be speaking. Let's try and remember what the commission agreed to and not your personal, I didn't like this or did like that. What you can do, we do allow for a dissenting position, minority position, when we're making a formal presentation. But I think the presumption will be we're speaking, each of us, on behalf of the commission. So think in those terms, unless you have something you really want to bring up as a dissenting position, but make clear it's your personal dissenting position if you do. And the other thing is they like to hear from everybody. The veterans know this. So they might just think of something you might want to elaborate on
Okay.
while the staff is giving its recommendation or its background, I should say. You might want to think about what you might want to jump in with, because sometimes a council member will say, well, I want to hear from somebody else. Shut up, Mr. Nugent. I want to hear from, Mike Vanderline this time, and I want to hear from Deborah Srebnick or something. So just think about that. Do you know where we are on the agenda and what other items they'll be taking up at that meeting?
I want to say it's as of today, it seemed to be a pretty light agenda, but
Okay.
we're a couple of weeks out, so things can change. So I think they will go through their regular business items. I don't recall that there was a lot on the business before they would then get to the joint meeting, but I'll certainly keep track of that for you so that,
Okay.
if I feel it's going to be too long, I'll let you know, but that's not what I'm anticipating.
Can we try and put ours near the front of the agenda?
I think I think that usually the council want to get through, the public comments, the consent
Well, I know,
agenda,
yeah.
and then the
Yeah.
business,
Yeah.
and then the joint meeting. That's kind of how it's typically been scheduled, rather than have the joint meeting and then move to their business.
Right.
But I think usually we try and be sensitive when we're inviting a whole bunch of people to a meeting that the business side of it is usually shorter.
Okay.
So.
All right, and the public hearing?
Public hearing, so you will receive a packet, and it will look like a pretty substantial packet because it will have everything in it, all the changes shown. So what usually happens at the public hearing, this is more of a formal setting for public comment, that Doug will open the meeting as the chair, and then he will ask staff to give a background overview. So then staff will then give an overview of what the content of the public hearing is. Now, whether that will be PowerPoint or verbal, to be determined at this point. After that, then Doug, as the chair, would open for public comment. There's a sign-in sheet, and so Doug will then call each person to come forward and speak, and generally outline the terms of how public comment is generally anticipated, try to encourage brevity or to encourage people, if one person's spoken, not to repeat that. So Doug will outline the rules of public comment. The public comment will be received, the public hearing will then be closed, and then there's the opportunity for deliberation after that.
Also, we will deliberate instead of waiting for next meeting. We'll deliberate immediately after that meeting.
You can, or you can wait. So
Right. May 5th, I think, is the meeting that we have targeted for the your conclusion. But if it's not a huge public hearing, then you could start that evening.
Right.
Again, this will be the full book, presumably. We anticipate sending it we have to send it to the state for their review. So at the same time it goes out to you all, it will go to the state and to the Puget Sound Regional Council for their comments back. We are planning to do something with the Kenmore Reporter. The woman and I have been trading calls about whether we'll do an advertisement or an insert. My guess it will probably be an advertisement. We'll try to get it either on the third page or on the back page. It'll certainly be on the website. We'll do a press release, those kinds of things. It's been kind of a fine line because many of the substantive decisions have been made over the past couple of years, the shoreline, the parks, to some degree the land use element, the transportation element. So these follow-on elements are not quite as sexy as that first set. But anyway, so we're also trying to let people know that because the city regularly updates its comprehensive plan, it's not like we didn't touch it for 10 years and now we're updating it. It's not the same process. It's a kind of a rolling update, and what we've done this time is just try to refresh those that we're not needing to make substantive changes to.
Okay. My hunch is it will be a lightly attended public hearing, but to all those of you watching tonight, please come, share your thoughts.
There you
Look forward
go.
and entertain anybody's response to it. Okay, any comments on the, go ahead, Deborah.
Well, when you send, I don't know when that's going to come, but in your memo, could you just remind us which pieces will be discussed with the council so that we can
Right, that will
know
be-
in our heads what's going to be for which? I mean, the
Yeah.
whole thing is for Tuesday, I understand, but only part of it for Monday.
Right,
So-
and in fact, the agenda bill, which is the cover sheet that goes on the council packet that you'll receive, specifies exactly
Oh,
what
okay, great.
what items will be included and explains that the others are not being included, but that they will see them in June.
Okay.
Okay. Any other comment? I know we have a new city website. Don't know if anybody's seen it, but if you encounter a sudden and perhaps overwhelming surge in your recognition, it'll be because our picture is now on the website. You got to dig a little bit, but you may be getting approached by strangers.
Look at that.
Prepare yourself for that. All right. Any new business? There being no new business, I hereby adjourn this meeting.
next week for the Love of Cities workshop.
That's right.
Hopefully on
Thank
your
you.
agenda.
Thank you.
Oh, who can get to the city website? I have
April 20th.
It's the joint meeting.